Okay, so today I'm going to give you guys a bit of a walkthrough and a walk around on my Traxxas Drag spec Jato. This is not a package you can just get. I call it my drag spec because I built it for drag racing. I'm going to give you guys a walk around and show you guys more or less what I needed to do to get it to where it is now. So, first glimpse here, you can already tell this is not stock. Now the zip ties here, I broke the shock tower earlier today, or no, yesterday. But besides the point, the zip ties are holding it together. This battery here was actually the battery for the original starter wand. Now the original Traxxas 3.3 that I had on this thing, well, it was a bit worn out. And besides that, it really didn't make a whole lot of torque, or power for that matter. However, it was an RPM beast. Now, another thing you can notice, these are not stock tires in the front or the rear. Now, I bought these because I knew that they would hook, and then they didn't. But again, besides the point. If you treat these in oil, I typically use like a mineral oil or something like that. Baby oil works really well. Uh, the other day I treated these with two-stroke oil, and it took like a week for them to soak in. So yes, it does make it really sticky, and they do last a bit longer for their stickiness, but you will have to wait quite a bit longer. Now, the front tires, these are off of a Traxxas Bandit, Rustler, like whatever, they're Bandit tires. Now, these in the rear are actually Proline, what are they called? Yeah, Primes. These cost about $40. You can get them at local hobby shops like Hobbytown or something like that. Now, now over here, this is not the stock engine. This is actually a big block that I had to do a conversion for. So now I'll go ahead and turn this with the car around. And I am utilizing the stock exhaust, stock tank, stock linkage, and servos. Now the front steering servo is not stock. It's actually an upgraded waterproof brushless unit that I paid about $40 for on Amazon. And the battery here, what it's doing is this is actually powering the servos, because the stock battery box gave out about 6 volts. Not bad, but it used 4 AA's. That was not enough MAH or power to run these servos, so they were constantly dying and constantly really slow. Plus, AA batteries really don't like the cold. This battery doesn't seem to have a problem. I don't need to charge it that often. Doesn't pull a lot of power. I plug it in. Don't have an on-off switch, and I just have a connection that I had to custom make. So that's one of the few custom parts that you'll have to do here. Now over here, you'll see this far from stock exhaust header, I guess. Now, what I have done here is something a bit out of the ordinary. So, what I did is I took an exhaust boot, the stock resonator, and this 90-degree rubber bend. Now, if you're going to do this, I'd highly recommend going with metal. I plan to eventually convert this to a metal bend. But this, I believe, is... I had to trim it, too. I believe it is off of a rustler, a nitro rustler for an intake tube or something like that. But it runs into the exhaust, and it seems to work out pretty well. Now, we did, in fact, drill out that hole. Had to. No way to get around it. Now, the end of it has actually been ported as well. But I'd previously modified the 3.3, and it needed to flow more. It was a bit of a beast, but not enough. Now, if you look over here, you can tell that it does not have an easy start. It has a pull start unit, which I'll show you right here. Now, I bought this engine off of eBay for about $100. Not a bad deal and it's a 4.5 cc or a 0.28 cubic inch, and it claims to make about 3 horsepower on a decent tune, which means on a good tune it should make close to 4. Now this thing is a torque beast, so you're gonna have to re-gear it, and it doesn't rev nearly as high as the 3.3. So over here, back on the gearing end of things, this the clutch bell is not the stock one. If you have a factory Jato, you should have a 22 tooth clutch bell. This is a 32 pitch or a 0.08 metric pitch. And what I have over here is not a stock pinion. You can get a 50 or a 54 to fit this pitch direct from Traxxas, but that's not what I have here. This I had to do a little bit of searching for, and this is actually a 48 tooth, 32 pitch pinion gear. Now I had to modify that a bit. I had to drill out the pilot hole for the bolt here because the bearings behind it wouldn't fit. Now, one thing you may notice about this clutch bell is it does have little holes in the back. The stock one does not. But that's good news. Now, if you look around, I do have the stock shocks on it. The stock Jato air filter seems to fit this carburetor quite nicely. And you'll see that that is my big baller carburetor. This carburetor, compared to the Jato carb, is virtually indestructible. Not saying that I can't break it, but you know. Now, the throttle response is insane on this engine. Now, what you're going to have to do here with the pinion is you're going to have to loosen that slipper clutch, unless you want to be shearing pinions all day long. I had it locked for a while, and don't get me wrong, it was really fun. Thing did monster wheelies like no one's business. But it did not like it. That pinion just kept shearing. I sheared 3 pinions trying to keep this thing on the road. But you're going to break things, you're going to have fun. That's how these cars are. Now, on top of that, I paid about $250 for this car. It also has a TQ receiver and controller. I plan on eventually upgrading it to TQI. And yeah, it's got the factory wheelie bar, which again, I plan to eventually upgrade that. Now, with this motor, it is not anything like the 3.3 in several ways. One of those things is the glow plug heater. Now, what I have is this really nice rechargeable dynamite glow plug heater. It's very nice. It even has a working gauge. Now, you can get really cheap ones that gauge will not really work too well, but this one I've never had a problem with, and that gauge has been really reliable. Now, one thing you will need to know is that when you first get this motor, it is going to go through at least one glow plug before the motor is fully broken in. This motor itself is, I believe, sold out from where I bought it from, but you can get other motors similar to it. Now, the big question here is, how did I get the big block to fit? Well, I ordered a big block mount off of eBay, which they'll run you about $40, $50 with shipping. Now, I did have to modify it a little bit. I completely ignored the instructions, cut one out, sliced my finger with the hacksaw that I used to cut the mount, and then I put it in there. Now, if you do it my way, please note, you will have to do copious amounts of machining, not only to the mount in the engine block, but to the plastic around it. Otherwise, you will not get very good adjustment. So, yeah, that's bottom line there is copious amounts of machining. I've probably spent at least 10 or 12 hours machining that whole thing. Now, on to the fuel. Now, a lot of people say that, yeah, you need to run less nitro content for a bigger motor. I guess you could say that, but I've run the same fuel I've always run with the 3.3 or the big block. I run the VP Good Stuff, the purple fuel. I'll show you the can. This is the fuel that I run. I run the 20% nitro mix because it's never let me down. Now, if you're just getting into the nitro world, this is going to hurt your pocket big time. That's $40 a gallon. Now, this is the gallon bottle. You can get these by the quart, but it is not worth it. But by the quart, it's almost $20 a quart, which double that, and you only have half a gallon for what this costs. So this is worth half the price. Now, this car has copious amounts of power. Obviously, it won't have as much traction. This motor, as long as you remove the easy start and all that, and not try to mod it for this motor, which, by the way, that easy start will never work for this motor. It cannot crank over the copious amounts of compression that this thing has. Like, it has so much compression, you can literally lift the entire chassis by the pull cord. Now, because I removed the battery out of the back, which this is the battery box, and I put it up here, that helped my weight in the front a bit. Handles a bit better. But I've got an empty box back here and no weight. What do you do? Well, a lot of people will use lead wheel weights, like for wheel balancing. Put them in there and get a bit more traction. Now, what I did, and I'm not going to open this up because it's a pain in the ass, but this is actually filled with pennies. There's exactly 1 pound of pennies in there, and then there's a rubber glove to keep them from making noise. And now that I've covered everything beneath the body, we'll move on to the body. Okay, so now here she is with the body on. That's right, game over. That's what we call it. Now, playing with like the electric cars and whatnot, it's kind of like a video game. The instant response and all that, that's why I call it game over. Because I built this car for one reason. To compete with electrics and take them down. That's the main purpose of this car. Yes, it is a drag car. I want this thing to be the fastest it can be in a straight line. That's why it's got tiny tires in the front. I don't need to go around corners. Who cares? I don't like corners. I like going straight. I like going fast. That's why those are tiny. Now onto the wing. I am not exactly sure how much downforce this produces, but it produces downforce. This wing is actually custom. I actually made this out of an old DVD box, which you can do this at home. All I did was cut it out with a hot knife and take a hole punch to it to fit the body mounts. Now, this is not a Jato body. This is not a body you can buy for a Jato and just slap it on and go. This is a 78 Camaro body that I purchased, painted, cut out, and stickered for this particular chassis. Now the other body's pretty cool. It's just a trophy truck though, and not a lot of cars look like this. The body isn't even done yet. Like, I'm gonna paint this the same color as this. Unfortunately, it's kind of blue, but it's difficult to tell anyway, especially when it's flying by at 80 miles an hour. The second thing I wish to do is I want to put headlights in it. Maybe taillights. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. Now, this big block is super easy to tune. The 3.3, very, very picky. Its tolerances were super tight, and it never really wanted to run, ever. So, when you do get the 3.3 running, you have to spend copious amounts of hours tuning it right. Well, Unless you're like me, you can get it done in about 5 minutes. But it's a pain in the ass to retune it every time you take it out, and it's a 6-degree difference in temperature outside. And you have to retune it to make sure you hit enough RPM to shift. This big block doesn't fucking care. You can just run it. Like, it'll shift gears. It'll still hit pretty high of an RPM. Half the time it's running really rich. When you lean it out, you start to break shit. Now, I will give you this much information on this though. If you're tired of stripping out pinions and you want to keep the clutch gear locked for the slipper, and you might consider a metal one. My opinion, if you're not looking to spend at least another $100, don't do it. Keep with the plastic one and keep the slipper clutch loose. Or keep it tight and keep stripping out pinions. Now, I do eventually plan to correct this and put a metal pinion in there. But in order to do that and keep it safe, you also have to upgrade the training gears to full metal. Now, there is a gear set on eBay and Amazon for about $100. It's a full metal gear set. Looks sweet. It's got its own differential. And from what I've heard, it's virtually indestructible. Now, the gears inside of this trainee are plastic. You give it too much power, they're gonna snap. Simple as that. They're gonna shear off. That's why I keep the pinion loose and I keep it plastic, because you make it metal, and that's no longer your fuse. That's your fuse. If something goes wrong, that pinion shears. It does not damage the trainee. Whereas if you have a metal one, it isn't going to shear. And at that point, what's the weak point? These tires aren't going to give way to that plastic transmission. Those drive shafts, they stand up to electric cars too, with their amount of torque. That's probably not going to break either. So what's going to break is your training. However, if you upgrade them all to metal gears, the tires do become your weak point. Or in some cases, the drive shafts. Now, if you're just getting into the hobby, there's a lot of things you can fix with zip ties. Just takes a little bit of ingenuity. Well, that's about all I have for you today. And, yeah. Coronavirus. Sucks. I can't go get parts. See you guys later.